Think for a moment. What if the parts of yourself you try hardest to hide, suppress, or deny are not flaws to be eliminated, but signals pointing directly toward your life's purpose? What if your fear, your anger, your contradictions, and even your inner chaos are not obstacles to meaning, but messages you have been avoiding for years? This idea feels deeply uncomfortable because it challenges almost everything modern culture teaches about self-improvement. You are told to fix yourself, to remove what is dark, to become more positive, more controlled, more acceptable. You are encouraged to polish the surface of your personality while quietly discarding anything that does not fit the image of who you are supposed to be. Carl Jung, one of the most influential psychologists in history, believed this strategy is precisely why so many people feel lost, empty, and disconnected, even when their lives appear successful from the outside. Jung argued that most human suffering does not come from a lack of achievement or opportunity, but from a refusal to confront what lives inside us. According to him, people do not suffer because they are broken, but because they are divided. Jung believed that every individual carries a hidden, unconscious dimension that quietly shapes behavior, relationships, decisions, and ultimately destiny itself. He called this hidden dimension the shadow. The shadow is not evil by nature. It is simply unknown, and what remains unknown within you does not disappear. It expresses itself indirectly, through self-sabotage, anxiety, compulsive behavior, projection, and the strange sense that life is happening on the surface while something essential remains untouched. Jung's work was never about comfort. It was about truth. He observed that modern individuals often construct a socially acceptable identity, what he called the persona, while pushing away instincts, emotions, and traits that do not fit cultural expectations. Over time, this creates an inner split. You may appear functional, successful, or even admired, yet inwardly something feels missing. Something essential feels absent, and you cannot quite explain why. Jung believed that what feels missing is often locked inside the shadow. The shadow contains the qualities you were taught were unacceptable: anger, envy, ambition, desire for power, emotional sensitivity, rebellion, vulnerability, and even creativity. As children, when certain behaviors were punished, ignored, or shamed, we learned to disown them. They did not vanish. They went underground. Jung warned that when the shadow is ignored, it does not remain passive. It begins to control life from behind the scenes. You may find yourself repeating the same destructive patterns, drawn into the same conflicts, or inexplicably blocked whenever you try to move forward. You may feel driven by impulses you do not understand, or trapped in cycles you swear you want to escape. Here is the insight many people miss. Jung did not see the shadow as something to eliminate. He saw it as a reservoir of life energy. Inside it lies not only what society labeled as negative, but also unrealized strength, creativity, authenticity, and direction. The path toward purpose, according to Jung, does not come from becoming more virtuous on the surface. It comes from integrating what has been rejected within. This is why Jung connected the discovery of purpose to the process he called individuation. Individuation is the lifelong journey of becoming whole. It requires confronting the unconscious not to judge it, but to understand it. Jung believed that purpose is not something you invent intellectually. It emerges naturally when the conscious personality aligns with the deeper layers of the psyche. Ask yourself honestly, what traits do you criticize most intensely in others? Jung observed that strong emotional reactions often reveal projections of the shadow. What desires do you suppress because they feel dangerous or inappropriate? What parts of your personality feel alive but forbidden? These questions are uncomfortable because they expose what the ego would rather avoid, but they are also doorways. Jung famously said that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Throughout his clinical work, he observed that many people found direction only after facing inner darkness. Depression, anxiety, and existential crises were not merely illnesses to be eliminated. They were signals, messages from the unconscious demanding attention. When listened to, They often guided individuals toward lives that felt authentic rather than socially approved. As Jung went deeper into the structure of the psyche, he realized something unsettling. The shadow does not merely influence isolated moments of weakness. It quietly organizes entire life patterns. Careers chosen to please others, relationships formed to avoid abandonment, moral beliefs adopted out of fear rather than truth. Much of what people call fate, Jung saw as unconscious material playing itself out repeatedly until it is made conscious. When the shadow is denied, it does not disappear. It seeks expression. Jung observed that what we refuse to live consciously, we are forced to live unconsciously. This is why people experience sudden anger that feels disproportionate, attraction to destructive partners, or a persistent sense of boredom even in a comfortable life. These are not random flaws. They are signals of psychic imbalance, expressions of disowned parts demanding recognition. One of Jung's most provocative ideas was that the shadow often appears projected onto others. You may condemn arrogance while secretly longing for confidence and authority. You may despise weakness while suppressing your own sensitivity. You may judge manipulation while ignoring your own unmet need for control. Jung believed these projections are mirrors. They reveal precisely what the psyche is trying to reclaim. This has profound implications for purpose. If you consistently react strongly to certain traits in others, it may be because those traits are connected to unrealized potential within you. The shadow does not only contain what is socially unacceptable. It contains what was never allowed to develop. Creativity buried under practicality. Leadership crushed by fear of judgment. Spiritual curiosity silenced by rigid belief systems. Jung warned that a life built entirely on adaptation leads to neurosis. When an individual lives only according to external expectations, the inner world revolts. The psyche seeks balance. Anxiety, emptiness, compulsive behaviors, and chronic dissatisfaction are not signs that something is wrong with you. They are signs that something essential within you has been ignored for too long. This is why Jung saw crises as meaningful. He believed that periods of breakdown often precede breakthroughs. When the old identity collapses, the unconscious seizes the opportunity to introduce new material. Many people resist this process, desperately trying to return to who they were. Jung argued that true healing begins when one allows the old self to die so a more authentic one can emerge. Purpose, in this sense, is not discovered by setting goals alone. It is revealed through confrontation. What frightens you, what fascinates you, what exhausts you, what secretly excites you but feels dangerous to pursue. Jung believed the unconscious speaks through symbols, emotions, dreams, and recurring themes. Ignoring these messages leads to stagnation. Listening to them leads to transformation. Jung's own life embodied this process. After his break with Sigmund Freud, he entered a profound psychological crisis. He experienced vivid dreams, inner visions, and a sense of losing control. Rather than suppressing these experiences, Jung chose to engage with them consciously. He documented them, reflected on them, and allowed them to reshape his understanding of the psyche. This confrontation with his own shadow became the foundation of his most important ideas. Here is a question worth reflecting on. If everything in your life were stripped away except what feels deeply meaningful, what would remain? Jung believed that meaning emerges when the ego stops resisting the unconscious and begins cooperating with it. Purpose is not imposed from the outside. It is revealed from within, often through discomfort and inner tension. To engage with the shadow consciously is not an act of indulgence, nor is it a descent into chaos. Jung was very clear about this. Integration does not mean acting out every impulse or justifying destructive behavior. It means developing awareness. The moment something unconscious becomes conscious, it loses its blind power. What was once fate becomes choice. Jung emphasized that most people fear the shadow because they mistake awareness for permission. In truth, awareness creates responsibility. When you recognize your aggression, you can channel it into assertiveness rather than violence. When you acknowledge your desire for power, you can transform it into leadership instead of manipulation. When you accept your vulnerability, it becomes empathy instead of weakness. The shadow, when integrated, becomes a source of balance. This process requires courage because the ego prefers control and familiarity. The unconscious disrupts both. Jung noted that the psyche resists growth just as the body resists pain, yet without this inner friction, no real development occurs. He believed that the tension between opposites is what generates psychological energy. Light gains meaning only in contrast to darkness. Strength emerges through confrontation with weakness. One of the most important tools Jung identified for shadow integration was honest self-observation. Not judgment, not condemnation, but curiosity, watching your reactions, noticing patterns, asking why certain situations trigger disproportionate emotion. The shadow often reveals itself through exaggeration. When an emotion feels overwhelming, it is rarely about the present moment alone. It carries the weight of something long suppressed. Dreams also played a central role in Jungian psychology. Jung believed dreams are messages from the unconscious expressed in symbolic language. Shadow figures often appear in dreams as strangers, enemies, monsters, or threatening characters. These figures are not there to harm you. They represent aspects of yourself that have been denied expression. When approached with openness rather than fear, they become guides. Jung warned that avoiding this work leads to projection on a collective level as well. When individuals refuse to confront their own shadow, they project it onto groups, ideologies, or enemies. This creates moral superiority, division, and violence. Jung witnessed this dynamic firsthand during times of social upheaval. For him, personal shadow work was not only a path to individual purpose, but a responsibility toward humanity. As shadow material is integrated, something subtle but powerful begins to happen. The individual feels more grounded, more real, more alive. Decisions stop being driven purely by fear or approval. Choices begin to align with inner truth. This is where purpose starts to take shape, not as a grand fantasy, but as a quiet sense of rightness. Ask yourself this: what truth about yourself have you been postponing? What inner voice keeps returning despite your attempts to silence it? Jung argued that what you resist most persistently often holds the key to your next stage of development. The unconscious is patient, but it is persistent. It will repeat the lesson until it is learned. This stage of the journey can feel lonely. Jung acknowledged that individuation often separates a person from the crowd. When you stop living solely by external expectations, some relationships may shift or fall away. But what replaces them is something far more valuable: inner coherence. A sense that your life is no longer fragmented, but moving in a meaningful direction. Jung believed that purpose is not something you chase, but something that reveals itself when inner conflict begins to resolve. When the shadow is no longer an enemy, when unconscious material is no longer fighting for expression, the psyche reorganizes itself around meaning. Life stops feeling random. Even challenges begin to make sense as part of a larger pattern. Jung called this deeper pattern the self. The self is not the ego. It is the totality of the psyche, conscious and unconscious working in harmony. Purpose, from this perspective, is not a career title, a social role, or a checklist of achievements. It is the expression of the self through a unique individual life. No one else can live it for you. No one else can define it for you. This is why Jung rejected the idea of a universal formula for meaning. What fulfills one person may suffocate another. Purpose emerges when you stop asking who you should be and begin discovering who you actually are. The shadow plays a decisive role in this because it contains precisely what the ego needs to become whole. As integration deepens, you become less reactive, less driven by unconscious guilt or hidden hunger for approval. You begin to act from a center that feels stable. Jung observed that people at this stage often describe a sense of being guided, as if life itself were cooperating with their inner direction. Obstacles become teachers rather than enemies. Jung never promised comfort. He promised meaning. He believed that a meaningful life can endure suffering, while a meaningless one collapses under even minor pressure. Purpose does not remove pain, transforms it. When you know why you are walking your path, you can bear its weight. At the deepest level, Jung saw purpose as an ethical responsibility. Becoming whole is not selfish. An integrated individual is less likely to project inner darkness onto others, less likely to seek enemies, less likely to surrender autonomy to destructive ideologies. Personal shadow work, in Jung's view, was a foundation for a healthier society. So ask yourself one final question. If your darkness holds your unrealized strength, what might your life become if you stopped running from it? What would change if you listened instead of resisted? Jung believed that the moment you accept your shadow, you take the first real step toward becoming who you were meant to be. Your purpose is not hidden from you out of cruelty. It is hidden behind fear, conditioning, and the parts of yourself you were told not to be. When you reclaim them, purpose stops being a mystery. It becomes a lived experience. And that is the paradox at the heart of Jungian psychology. The path to light does not avoid darkness, passes directly through it.